The Sunday dinner table at my parents' house buzzed with the familiar energy of family gathered around pot roast and mashed potatoes. 26 relatives had crowded into the dining room and adjoining living space for our monthly family meal, creating the comfortable chaos that had defined these gatherings for as long as I could remember. I sat in my usual spot near the kitchen, methodically cutting my meat and listening to the overlapping conversations about work, weather, and weekend plans. My sister Rachel, 33 and perpetually optimistic about her latest business venture, commanded attention from the head of the table where she'd positioned herself like a keynote speaker addressing an eager audience. She wore her expensive blazer and carefully applied makeup even for casual family dinner, maintaining the polished appearance she'd cultivated since graduating from business school 5 years ago with an MBA she'd never quite managed to put to practical use. "I have some incredible news to share with everyone," Rachel announced, tapping her wine glass with a butter knife to ensure complete attention from all 26 family members. "My consulting business is finally getting the major expansion opportunity I've been working toward for months." The table quieted except for the soft clinking of silverware as everyone turned their focus to Rachel's presentation. At 29, I'd learned to recognize the particular tone she used when announcing her entrepreneurial breakthroughs, which occurred with impressive regularity but somehow never translated into sustainable business success. "The market demand for digital marketing consulting has absolutely exploded," Rachel continued, gesturing with the confidence of someone delivering a well-rehearsed pitch. "Small businesses are desperate for professional guidance on social media strategy, online advertising, and brand development. I'm talking about a completely underserved market segment with serious growth potential." My cousin Michael, who worked in corporate sales and considered himself knowledgeable about business development, nodded approvingly from across the table. "That's smart positioning, Rachel. Digital marketing is definitely where the money is right now. What's your expansion strategy?" Rachel smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd anticipated exactly this question. "I'm scaling up to handle corporate clients instead of just local small businesses. Think regional restaurant chains, medical practice groups, professional service firms. The contract values are exponentially higher, but I need significant upfront capital for staff, equipment, and office space." Uncle Jim, who owned a moderately successful insurance agency, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Sounds like a solid growth plan. Have you secured the necessary financing for this kind of expansion?" That's when Rachel's expression shifted into something more self-satisfied and conspiratorial. She glanced around the table like she was about to reveal a particularly clever solution that demonstrated her superior business acumen and strategic thinking. "Actually, I've already solved the financing challenge through some creative resource allocation," she said with obvious pride in her problem-solving abilities. "Sometimes successful entrepreneurs have to think outside traditional lending structures and utilize available assets more strategically." I continued eating my pot roast and green beans, maintaining my usual quiet presence at family gatherings. Something in Rachel's tone suggested this story was heading toward territory that might involve me directly, and experience had taught me that patience usually revealed important details without any prompting on my part. My Aunt Susan, who managed the accounting department at a regional manufacturing company, looked genuinely impressed. "Creative financing can be brilliant if you structure it properly. Are you talking about alternative lenders or investor partnerships?" Rachel practically glowed under the attention and admiration. "Even better. I identified an underutilized asset that could serve as collateral for a substantial business loan. Sometimes the best solutions are right in front of you, but you have to have the vision to recognize the opportunity." The way she emphasized underutilized asset sent a familiar warning signal through my mind. In my work as a senior investigative analyst with the Drug Enforcement Administration's Asset Forfeiture and Money Laundering section, I'd learned to recognize verbal patterns that often preceded admissions of financial fraud or unauthorized use of other people's property. "What kind of asset?" asked my cousin Jennifer, who worked as a financial planner and understood the complexities of collateral requirements for business loans. Rachel's grin widened as she prepared to share what she clearly considered the most impressive part of her financing strategy. "My brother Kevin's car. It's been sitting in his driveway for months, barely getting used, so I listed it as collateral for my $85,000 business expansion loan." The admission hung in the air for a moment before the family erupted in appreciative laughter and enthusiastic approval. My father actually clapped his hands together with delight. That's brilliant thinking. Why let valuable assets sit idle when they could be generating business opportunities? My mother beamed with maternal pride as she looked between Rachel and me. This is exactly the kind of family cooperation that leads to real success. Rachel's entrepreneurial vision combined with Kevin's stable assets. It's perfect synergy. Cousin Michael raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. Here's to Rachel's business expansion and Kevin's contribution to family success. Smart resource utilization all around. The table joined the toast enthusiastically, with multiple relatives offering congratulations to Rachel for her clever financing solution and to me for being a supportive brother. I continued eating my dinner peacefully, maintaining the same calm expression I'd worn throughout the conversation. What the family didn't know was that my 2019 Honda Accord wasn't just a personal vehicle sitting in my driveway. As a federal law enforcement officer with top-secret security clearance, all of my assets were registered in federal databases and monitored for unauthorized activity as part of comprehensive security protocols designed to detect potential compromise attempts by hostile actors. My car's title was flagged in multiple federal systems, including DEA asset tracking databases, Treasury Department monitoring networks, and Homeland Security personnel protection protocols. Any attempt to use the vehicle as collateral or transfer ownership would automatically trigger federal investigation procedures that couldn't be stopped once initiated. Rachel had just admitted to committing wire fraud, collateral fraud, and unauthorized use of federal employee assets in front of 26 witnesses, most of whom had enthusiastically encouraged her criminal behavior. She'd also potentially compromised federal security monitoring systems designed to protect sensitive law enforcement personnel from financial exploitation or coercion. The loan approval process was incredibly smooth, Rachel continued, basking in the family's admiration. Banks love lending against reliable collateral like late-model vehicles, especially when they're owned by stable government employees with excellent credit profiles. More murmurs of approval and appreciation for Rachel's business acumen. My grandfather, who had built a successful construction company from nothing, nodded with obvious respect. Smart entrepreneurs recognize opportunities that others miss. Using available family resources shows real strategic thinking. The irony was almost overwhelming. My reliable vehicle, owned by a stable government employee, was actually registered as a monitored asset belonging to a federal narcotics investigator whose work involved tracking exactly the types of financial crimes Rachel was describing so proudly. "When do you expect to see the first returns on this expansion investment?" asked Uncle Jim, clearly invested in Rachel's success story. "The new office space is already secured, and I'm interviewing senior consultants next week," Rachel replied with obvious satisfaction. Corporate client contracts typically run 6 figures annually, so this investment should generate serious cash flow within 90 days. Aunt Susan leaned forward with curiosity. "What kind of corporate clients are you targeting specifically?" "Regional healthcare systems, restaurant franchise groups, and professional service networks," Rachel explained with the confidence of someone who'd clearly researched her target market. These organizations desperately need sophisticated digital marketing strategies but lack internal expertise. The profit margins are incredible because they're willing to pay premium rates for proven results. I finished my mashed potatoes and listened to Rachel receive continuous praise for her entrepreneurial vision and strategic resource utilization. The conversation had shifted into detailed business planning, with various relatives offering advice, connections, and encouragement for her expansion efforts. By the time dessert was served, Rachel had essentially held a business presentation complete with market analysis, growth projections, and implementation timeline. The family was thoroughly convinced they had witnessed a masterclass in creative entrepreneurship and family cooperation rather than a detailed confession of federal crimes. As we cleaned up after dinner, Rachel pulled me aside in the kitchen while loading the dishwasher with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing household operations alongside business responsibilities. "Kevin, I know I should have mentioned the collateral arrangement before finalizing the loan paperwork," she said with the tone of someone addressing a minor procedural oversight rather than serious criminal behavior. "But I knew you'd probably overthink the legal details and worry about complications that would never actually materialize." I continued drying dishes and arranging them in the cabinet, maintaining my calm demeanor. I'm sure you put considerable thought into all aspects of the financing arrangement, Rachel. She seemed relieved by my measured response and apparent lack of objection to her unauthorized use of my vehicle as loan collateral. Exactly. This is really a win-win situation for both of us. The business expansion will generate substantial profits, and I'll pay off the loan ahead of schedule. Your car's value will actually increase from the positive payment history, plus you're contributing to genuine family business success. I hung up the dish towel and turned to face her directly. I hope your business venture proceeds exactly according to your projections, Rachel. Monday morning brought typical Washington, D.C. traffic and the familiar routine of commuting to DA headquarters for another week of analyzing complex money laundering operations and asset forfeiture cases. I arrived at my office by 7:30 a.m. to review overnight intelligence reports about drug trafficking organizations operating along the I-95 corridor. My position as a senior investigative analyst required maintaining comprehensive knowledge of financial crime patterns, asset concealment techniques, and money laundering methodologies used by criminal organizations to hide proceeds from illegal activities. The work involved coordinating with FBI financial crimes units, Treasury Department investigators, and federal prosecutors preparing major drug trafficking and money laundering cases. At 9:43 a.m., my secure phone rang with a call from my immediate supervisor, Special Agent Michael Torres, who served as Section Chief for our Money Laundering Investigations Unit. Agent Torres was a 15-year veteran of federal law enforcement who had worked his way up from field agent to supervisory roles overseeing complex financial investigations. "Kevin, I need you in my office immediately," Agent Torres said with the tone that indicated something significant had developed overnight. "We have a flagged transaction involving your personal assets that triggered automatic security protocols." I walked down the corridor to Agent Torres's office, passing the secure conference rooms where other analysts were briefing federal prosecutors about ongoing money laundering cases. His office overlooked the DA parking garage, and through the window I could see federal agents arriving for morning briefings about current investigations. "Have a seat," Agent Torres said, closing his door and activating the white noise generator that provided additional security for sensitive conversations. "Our automated monitoring systems detected unauthorized use of your vehicle as collateral for a business loan filed Friday afternoon." He opened a classified file folder and spread several documents across his desk, including copies of loan applications that showed my car's title information being used without my authorization. The loan was approved by Mid-Atlantic Business Bank for $85,000, with your vehicle listed as primary collateral by someone named Rachel Johnson who claimed to be your business partner. I reviewed the documents, which clearly showed Rachel's signature alongside forged versions of my signature on multiple loan agreements. She had used my car's title, registration, and insurance information while representing herself as my authorized business associate with permission to utilize my assets for commercial purposes. "Agent Torres, Rachel Johnson is my sister. I did not authorize her to use my vehicle or any other personal assets as collateral for business loans or any other financial arrangements." His expression shifted from procedural concern to professional focus as the implications became clear. "So this is collateral fraud and unauthorized use of federal employee assets. That triggers mandatory FBI involvement and federal prosecution under multiple statutes." He gathered the documents back into the classified file. "Kevin, I need to ask directly. Did you have any knowledge of your sister's loan application or business financing activities?" "No prior knowledge whatsoever. I learned about the loan at family dinner yesterday when Rachel announced it to 26 relatives, most of whom congratulated her on her resourcefulness and business acumen." Agent Torres leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone who had investigated financial crimes for over a decade and still encountered new examples of criminal behavior combined with complete lack of awareness about legal consequences. "She announced federal crimes at a family gathering with multiple witnesses present? 26 witnesses heard her admit to using my car as unauthorized collateral. Several family members specifically praised her for creative resource utilization and strategic asset management." He shook his head and reached for his secure phone. "Kevin, I'm initiating immediate coordination with FBI financial crimes units and federal prosecutors. This involves collateral fraud, wire fraud, unauthorized use of federal employee assets, and potential compromise of security monitoring systems. At 2:15 p.m., Special Agent Lisa Chin from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit arrived at DA headquarters to coordinate the federal investigation. Agent Chin specialized in financial fraud cases involving federal employees and had extensive experience with crimes targeting law enforcement personnel and their assets. Agent Johnson, I understand your sister used your personal vehicle as unauthorized collateral for a business loan, Agent Chin said as we met in a secure conference room. Can you provide details about how you discovered this information and any evidence of her admissions? I provided a comprehensive account of Sunday's family dinner, including Rachel's detailed explanation of her financing strategy and the family's enthusiastic support for her criminal activity. Agent Chin took detailed notes and asked specific questions about family members who had witnessed or encouraged the collateral fraud. This pattern is unfortunately common in cases involving federal employee assets, Agent Chin observed after reviewing my statement. Family members often assume they can use relatives' property for financial purposes without understanding the federal monitoring systems and enhanced penalties involved. She closed her notebook and looked at me directly. We'll be executing federal search warrants at your sister's business location and residence within the next 3 hours. Given her public admission to federal crimes with multiple witnesses, this investigation will proceed under expedited protocols. At 4:47 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. Kevin, federal marshals just surrounded my office with official vehicles and badges. Her voice was panicked and confused. They're saying I committed federal crimes involving unauthorized use of law enforcement assets. They have warrants for my computers, business records, and financial documents. I was finishing my daily case reports and preparing briefing materials for tomorrow's coordination meeting with federal prosecutors about a major money laundering investigation. Through my office window, I could see other federal agents leaving the building after completing their Monday briefings and casework. That sounds very concerning, Rachel. What specifically are the federal agents telling you? They have search warrants for collateral fraud, wire fraud, and violations of federal asset monitoring protocols. Her voice was becoming increasingly shrill with fear. They're asking about unauthorized use of federal employee property and potential security clearance violations. 3 federal agents had indeed arrived at Rachel's business office at 4:35 p.m., 2 FBI agents from the White-Collar Crime Unit and 1 DA investigator from our asset forfeiture section. They carried federal warrants authorizing seizure of computers, business documents, loan records, and any materials related to the fraudulent collateral arrangement. Rachel, I said calmly, maintaining the same professional tone I used when coordinating with federal prosecutors about financial crime cases, you admitted at family dinner that you used my car as unauthorized collateral for your business loan. That constitutes federal collateral fraud, wire fraud, and unauthorized use of federal employee assets. But it's just your car that sits in your driveway. I thought family helping family was perfectly legal. Federal law doesn't recognize family relationships as authorization for using someone else's property as loan collateral. You committed serious federal crimes using assets belonging to a federal law enforcement officer, which triggers enhanced penalties and mandatory prosecution protocols. The line went quiet except for her rapid breathing and the sound of federal agents explaining search procedures and legal rights in the background. Kevin, you have to stop this investigation. Tell them this was all a family misunderstanding. I cannot stop a federal investigation, Rachel. You committed federal crimes, you admitted to those crimes in front of 26 witnesses, and federal law enforcement agencies are required to prosecute collateral fraud and unauthorized asset usage regardless of family relationships. Agent Chen's voice could be heard explaining Miranda rights and federal arrest procedures. Rachel was being offered the opportunity to cooperate with the investigation and provide information about her criminal activity and any other individuals who might have been involved. They want to know about the loan application process, the forged signatures, and whether I used anyone else's assets without permission, Rachel said, her panic escalating as the reality of her situation became clear. What am I supposed to tell them? You should tell federal agents the complete truth about your criminal activity and retain qualified federal criminal defense counsel immediately, I replied using the same calm tone I employed when briefing law enforcement agencies about complex financial investigations. Providing false information to federal agents will result in additional charges for obstruction of justice and false statements to federal investigators. At 6:23 p.m., Rachel was formally arrested and charged with collateral fraud, wire fraud, unauthorized use of federal law enforcement assets, and violations of federal security monitoring protocols. She was processed at the federal detention facility and held pending federal arraignment. The charges were comprehensive and carried serious penalties. Collateral fraud involving federal employee assets carries enhanced sentencing guidelines, while wire fraud in amounts exceeding $80,000 triggers potential sentences of up to 15 years in federal prison. The security monitoring violations added additional penalties because Rachel had potentially compromised federal systems designed to protect law enforcement personnel from financial exploitation. Mid-Atlantic Business Bank faced regulatory investigation for their role in approving fraudulent collateral arrangements without adequate verification of asset ownership and authorization. The bank's loan officers were required to provide detailed testimony about their approval processes and documentation review procedures. The business office space Rachel had leased with the fraudulent loan funds was immediately forfeited as proceeds of criminal activity. Her corporate client contracts were terminated when potential clients learned their consultant had been arrested on federal fraud charges, and her business operations ceased entirely. My family's reaction followed predictable patterns of denial and misplaced blame. Multiple relatives called expressing disappointment that I had destroyed Rachel's business opportunity over what they continued to characterize as family cooperation rather than federal criminal activity. My mother was particularly distressed, repeatedly calling to demand that I resolve this situation by speaking to my supervisors about dismissing the charges or reducing the penalties. She couldn't comprehend that federal collateral fraud cases don't disappear because family members request leniency, and that my position involved investigating financial crimes rather than excusing them. At Rachel's federal arraignment, she appeared in federal court wearing detention clothing and looking exhausted from her time in federal holding. Her court-appointed federal defense attorney advised her to consider pleading guilty and cooperating fully with the investigation to minimize her sentence under federal sentencing guidelines. Federal prosecutors presented substantial evidence including Rachel's recorded admissions at the family dinner, testimony from 26 witnesses who heard her confess to collateral fraud, detailed financial records showing the unauthorized loan arrangement, and expert testimony from DA officials explaining federal asset monitoring systems and security protocols. The federal judge denied bail, citing the seriousness of fraud charges involving federal law enforcement assets and the potential for additional criminal activity if Rachel was released pending trial. She would remain in federal detention until sentencing, which was scheduled for 8 weeks later. During the pre-sentencing investigation, federal probation officers discovered that Rachel had previously exaggerated her business credentials and financial qualifications on multiple loan applications, suggesting a pattern of fraud extending beyond the collateral crime. She had also claimed false partnerships with several legitimate businesses to enhance her apparent credibility with lenders. The additional evidence of systematic fraud eliminated any possibility of reduced charges or lenient sentencing. Federal guidelines for crimes involving law enforcement personnel assets require enhanced penalties to protect federal monitoring systems and maintain the security of sensitive government operations. 8 weeks later, Rachel was sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison followed by 4 years supervised probation. The judge ordered restitution of $112,000 to cover the fraudulent loan amount, federal investigation costs, bank regulatory penalties, and administrative expenses for enhanced security protocol reviews. Federal prosecutors explained during sentencing that crimes involving federal law enforcement assets carry enhanced penalties because they potentially compromise security systems designed to protect personnel involved in sensitive operations against drug trafficking organizations and other criminal enterprises. The federal judge noted that Rachel's public confession of her crimes at a family gathering, witnessed by over 24 people, demonstrated complete disregard for federal law and a fundamental misunderstanding of the serious nature of collateral fraud and asset misuse. My position at DA was unaffected by Rachel's criminal activity, though my security clearance was reviewed and my asset monitoring was enhanced as a standard precautionary measure. Federal security officials conducted comprehensive background reinvestigations to ensure that Rachel's crimes hadn't compromised any sensitive operations or intelligence. The monthly family dinners were quietly discontinued after numerous relatives received federal subpoenas as material witnesses in criminal proceedings. Uncle Jim, Aunt Susan, and 8 cousins were required to provide sworn testimony about Rachel's admissions and the family's reaction to her criminal behavior. Several family members faced additional scrutiny when background investigators discovered that other relatives had also engaged in questionable financial arrangements involving shared credit cards, co-signed loans, and informal asset usage agreements that bordered on fraudulent activity. I continue working at DA analyzing money laundering operations and coordinating with federal prosecutors on major drug trafficking cases. I still drive my Honda Accord, which remains registered in federal databases as a monitored asset subject to enhanced security protocols. The difference is that family gatherings are now significantly smaller and more cautious. Rachel won't be eligible for release until she serves her complete federal sentence, and several relatives maintain distance from me because they associate me with causing her imprisonment rather than investigating the crimes she chose to commit. My parents occasionally call requesting that I help with Rachel's commissary expenses and legal fees for potential appeals. I explain that federal collateral fraud convictions carry serious long-term consequences, including permanent restrictions on business licenses, professional certifications, and access to commercial credit. They still don't understand that my security clearance prohibits financial assistance to family members convicted of federal crimes involving law enforcement assets, and that any such assistance would jeopardize my career and potentially result in criminal charges against me. Last month I received a letter from Rachel at the federal correctional facility where she's serving her sentence. She wrote that she's beginning to understand the seriousness of federal fraud charges, but she's struggling with why using family assets for business purposes resulted in federal prison rather than simple family cooperation. She asked why I never explained the federal monitoring systems and legal restrictions surrounding my personal property, especially given my work in federal law enforcement. I haven't responded to the letter. Federal employees are discouraged from maintaining correspondence with family members convicted of crimes involving federal assets, and my security clearance requires disclosure of all contact with individuals who have violated federal financial crime statutes. The monthly family dinners have been replaced with occasional smaller gatherings that I rarely attend. When I do interact with family members, they're notably more careful about discussing financial arrangements, business ventures, and any suggestions involving shared resources or asset usage. Rachel's business consulting career ended permanently with her federal conviction. The loan she obtained through collateral fraud was added to federal databases as evidence of systematic financial crimes targeting federal employee assets. My car remains in my driveway, registered under federal monitoring systems as the protected asset of a law enforcement officer with security clearance. It couldn't be used as collateral, transferred, or modified without extensive federal authorization and security reviews, exactly as it should be for someone with access to sensitive drug enforcement operations. Some lessons about federal law and the consequences of financial fraud can only be learned through direct experience with federal prosecution and imprisonment. Rachel is receiving comprehensive education about collateral fraud, wire fraud, and the enhanced penalties that apply when federal law enforcement assets are involved in criminal schemes. The business expansion never occurred. The fraudulent loan was seized as proceeds of criminal activity. My assets remain under enhanced federal protection, exactly where they belong for someone involved in investigating the same types of financial crimes Rachel chose to commit.